It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstein Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents, CENTS, of the sports media business industrial comics complex. How you doing today, Steve?
Yeah, we're not in the comics business, thankfully. I can honestly say I've never read a comic book in my life. Have you been a comic book guy,
What?
Chris? I've never read a comic book in my entire life. That is the guy. I swear to God, that's the truth.
Oh my God, Steve. Just let yourself live.
I literally read Moby Dick in like sixth grade, okay? I mean,
I have read, so I have read many comic books. I've read so many comic books, it's not even useful to quantify.
were you a collector?
Collect, with anything that, I guess, yes, at a broad brush, but because I've had to deal with collectors so much at various parts of my life, I don't like to identify as one. So I still have like a box that I will never get rid of, but that's
I've never read a comic book, but I did buy one once because again, in like sixth or seventh grade or something, I saw like an old X-Men comic book in like I forget, like somewhere, like a random, like a secondhand store or something. And I thought, man, I wonder if that's worth any money. Cause it was, some minimal, not like $5 or whatever back then. And so I thought I better buy this thing just in case it's worth money. And I never opened it because it just doesn't interest me really. And I subsequently learned it was worth nothing. And it was old, but it was just old, not old and valuable,
Yeah, no, comics, like trading cards, like records, like used first edition books. The difference between something that's worth a dime and worth $100 is a very wide spectrum.
Well, see, the other thing I bought on a whim like that, I saw I'm not one of these guys that's into albums, like records, vinyl. I think people are deluding themselves about the sound. They're not as good in my view. And it's a pain in the butt and all that. I don't even have a turntable, but I saw like 15 years ago a copy of Led Zeppelin 4 in an antique shop. Great condition. And I thought, man, it was like $20 or something. And so I thought I'm going to take a flyer on this just in case it's worth something. I don't have time to look up the serial number. I'm just going to waste $20 on this. And it was sitting in my closet for all that time, never having moved, never having looked at it. Like a year ago, I finally got it out and I looked the serial number up, and it wasn't like a totally new reprint. It was an older version of it, but it wasn't one of the original pressings of it. And so I got rid of it and sold it to a record store for like the same $20 I paid for it in the first place, which means I lost money ultimately on it. But I was really close because it was like the second printing of it.
I probably have 1,500 records.
You're a turntable guy, vinyl guy?
Yes.
I really truly don't get it. The sound sucks.
It does not suck. I'm not one of these people that really cares either way I'm not an audiophile from a listener perspective. So
I kind of am.
I don't care either way. I prefer a record, but the reason I collect records is not from an audio perspective. It's the artifact. It is the collector mentality. It's because I like to build a library. It's because I do like to listen to them socially. I like flipping records. I like people picking them out. I like displaying what we're listening to. So it's the whole experience, not solely the audio. I prefer the cracks. I prefer all of that stuff. But I can just as easily listen to any format.
Couldn't a CD do the same thing for you, other than the flipping the record?
I don't like. Yes, it can, and I probably had at one point. I probably had 2,500 CDs, which I have now pretty much gotten rid of. I just prefer, as an artifact, I prefer the LP. I like their bigness. They look more permanent to me. I like the deep analog nature of them.
I mean, I can certainly appreciate the love of the classic, for sure. I get that. But to me, it's about audio quality, and I'm just, no, you know, not doing it. And I also don't want that much clutter around, is the other thing.
They are not the easiest things to store. But my wife much prefers displaying and having LPs out in our living spaces than CDs. So that was probably also a driver.
You want to hear something funny about storage? So somebody at work is very into ties, and this guy actually has an entire tie room in his house with nothing with he's set up just for a closet. He's got 600 ties all neatly. He showed me a picture of it, all neatly displayed in this like bathroom size closet that's nothing but ties from ceiling to floor. And then so I'm an attorney, I have a bunch of ties, but my tie room is I had this like spinning tie rack thing on my hang, and then that spinning thing broke and fell off. So now they're just laying like hanging over randomly in a giant pile on like the lower closet rail in my closet, and then just a massive pile. And so I've been wearing I wore like the same tie for weeks on end because it was the one that was on top of the pile until finally people started saying, "Do you only have one tie here?" I said, "No, it's just under a tie." But this guy was like shaking his head at me because I have this massive, like twisted, like literally looks like a pile of junk that's just 100 ties.
Well, hey, there you go. A whole tie room is pretty. I respect I expect the dedication, the commitment to the bit, but that's intense.
Oh yeah, and it wasn't. And again, they were all neatly. It looked like you would find it in a department store. It was all neatly set up and displayed, and it's like, wow, dude, ties are your thing.
Yeah, that's wild. That is wild. No audio difference between ties. Um, I guess maybe visual noise from the different designs. There we go.
And he does wear like, very what I would call, I'm the opposite of stylish, but like very stylish ties every single day. So it's not just like a display thing. He does actually use all those ties.
Can you imagine if you were that into ties, but they were all bland? That would be
It's just all a different shade of
right. Yeah, here's the green section or whatever.
Well, that the tie room was organized by color.
I'm sure. Yeah, there's got to be some. Got to have some sense making wayfinding mechanism
in comparison to my literal pile of ties just laying on a laying on
right,
a coat
which smells the least. The funny thing about something like the Led Zeppelin album, though, is actually like it's kind of counterintuitive because the problem with something like Led Zeppelin is they sold so much
Yeah.
that there's actually, so there's actually a glut. But the good thing is you can kind of it's always going to be $20. It's never going to be $2. It's never going to be $200. But like you can kind of like you'll regularly pay $20 for it. That's like the price of quality, so to speak. But the quantity that just because they were so mega means that they aren't as rare.
I just thought, I'll take a flyer on it. If it happens to be like a really early one, maybe it's worth, something. That was all it was. And then I forgot about it and like stumbled on it in the closet. It was like setting up it was in that same closet with the tie pile, just like laying there for like years and years and years.
Have I ever told you? I may have said this about the 24-hour record store that I worked at.
No.
So I worked at a 24-hour record store, which at the time that I worked there, for part of the time, it was one of two in the world. The other one being in country, sorry. The other one being in Las Vegas, and then the Las Vegas one closed, and we were the only one. It is since closed. So we did have the distinction of being the only 24-hour record store. But the guy, and it was a classic New York City store where you could basically not walk in. And in fact, part of my job was sitting on that street guarding the stock that we would put on the street because you really couldn't shop inside the store
because it was so small.
No, it was so much full of stuff.
Oh, okay.
So, because this guy was such a crazy nut job collector that someone would come in and we'd buy and sell all day, and it'd be like the Italian pressing of Led Zeppelin 4. And you're like, oh, I don't think I have that Italian pressing. And so you'd walk into the store and people would be like, oh my God, I've been looking for the Italian pressing of Led Zeppelin 4. And he'd be like, sorry, not for sale.
Well, why did he have a store if he's not going to sell them all?
It was the craziest thing. It was like, and you're like, Craig, please, can we just sell this record? You don't need this. You probably have copies of it in your 4 to 5 storage spaces strewn across the city. And he'd be like, no. And people would come in and fight. People would come back in like 3 or 4 days later and like, please sell me that, and it would be a whole ordeal. But I've been around a lot of nutty record people, but I've never seen somebody like this.
So this was an obsessive compulsive who was paying to have his, feed his obsessiveness, basically.
Oh, at one point he was paying for, now this is like the late 90s, so not necessarily today's real estate market, but he was paying for a shop front in the East Village, 4 storage spaces, and an apartment that was also packed to the gills. Each one of those things you could barely get your nose inside of.
And so he was just selling enough records to pay the rent and all these things, basically.
That's exactly what he was doing. It was
couldn't afford to eat, but had his records.
No, yeah. This is really gross. He had a girlfriend once who also, all of his girlfriends helped manage the record store. It was a whole thing. And so I don't know why he even had girlfriends, but he always seemed to have a girlfriend. This one, he would he had nasal issues and he would obsessively drink Snapple. And so their bed was in the middle of like CDs, records, everything falling in on you. But there was a pile of tissues from his nose and old Snapple bottles. And one day she was like, I'm going to be a great girlfriend and clean up his snot rags and his Snapple bottles.
Uh-oh.
And so he came home and wigged out because the snot rags and the bottles weren't in the positions that he left them in.
This guy's got to be in a loony bin somewhere at this point.
Well, I think I kind of did lose track of him actually, but it did all implode on him. Like he just couldn't. Eventually, that shell game you can't maintain.
No, and imagine the girlfriend thinks she's doing a good thing. Clean up your mess. It's not even a real mess. It's just junk and trash, and
right. She's not even touching your stuff. Right. It's just it's taking out the garbage.
Literally trash.
So,
did you get paid more than minimum wage at this place?
Probably, but not much. But it was cash at the end of the day, and as many records as I
paying taxes on it.
No, and as many records as I could stash. The great thing about when I would be a buyer at a number of these places, there would be like people come to sell their collection. I'd be like, oh, I need that. So you'd make it part of the store's buy, but then you would just pay the till back, like the $5 for 5 records that you would get. That they're probably collectively worth like 75.
You'd probably never even know if you bought it or sold it, on behalf of the store.
No, yeah, it was a constant rotation.
And if the IRS is listening here, this is well past the statute of limitations for tax. It's just FYI.
All right, we'll transition to sports. There was this one crackhead that would run a magazine and used book stand down the block, and the hoarder would let him stash his stuff in the store when he wasn't set up on the street.
Oh God!
And he would pay me. That guy would then pay me to watch his stuff in old issues of Hockey Digest, which I don't know. He seemed to have an endless supply of 80s Hockey Digests.
Why? Because he's also a hoarder himself?
Yeah, I don't because that was his stock and trade. That's how he got his crack, was knowing what magazines and used books New Yorkers want.
The only magazines like that I ever stashed, we got to do real sports, but I had every Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue dating all the way back to the late, to the mid-80s.
We found Steve's collector lane.
No, you don't, because my ex-wife threw them all away, because she's like an anti-hoarder, anti-clutter person, and I had them all in like boxes in the attic, and I went up there and they were gone, and she was like, yeah, I threw all those stupid magazines away, which distressed me great. Now, mind you, I never looked at any of them, but I looked at them a couple of times when they arrived, and that was it. But I was like, I got all this. Someday I'm going to sell these. That was my thought. I'm going to have a whole collection of 40 years of these things.
Steve's misadventures in speculative pop culture
exactly.
ephemera.
I blew it on Zeppelin 4. I blew it on SI.
X-Men issue 322.
Yeah, it was something like, it was 300 something like that. Yeah, it was.
Oh, that's funny.
Don't let me collect.
All right. Well, here's a homework assignment for you, Steve. You should go find old DC Comics character and story, Sergeant Rock. You would probably enjoy Sergeant Rock.
But I'd have to read a comic book, which is
I know, but they're good. They're World War Sergeant Rock and Easy Company. Great stories about World War II.
I can't even watch comic book movies, much less read a comic book.
But this one, I'm gonna say, they're not superheroes. It's like okay. It's a war one.
Sergeant Rock, huh?
That's Sergeant Rock and Easy Company.
Slightly better than your average ridiculous comic.
Yeah, it's good. It's just they're just like tramping through like Belgium and France in World War II.
Speaking of useless and stupid,
Sports.
yes.
So maybe not so well, maybe both useless and stupid, but certainly high finance. The NFL apparently was something that this is like the no-brainer, right? It's super news, but also like one of those things that seems like kind of a duh moment at the same time. Is the NFL is beginning to talk and think, and the owners are getting together and saying, are they going to start accepting private equity as part of ownership bundles, like all the other major pro sports, NFL being the holdout? But I think the teetering edge of getting the Josh Harris group to 6 billion was a wake up call that they're pricing themselves out of their current rule structure. Will this rule fall, Steve?
Yes. The answer is yes. And we saw a story. This is Sports Business Journal, Ben Fisher. And, yeah. Pro Football Talk, unfortunately, has the story too, with that idiot Mike Florio. But so the issue is money. Okay. So Josh Harris paid, what was the total damage? 6 billion, right? That's
Yeah.
what he paid. There's not a lot of people who can scrape together $6 billion or even have enough equity in some kind of asset where they can raise $6 billion. And so you have to have a very, very large. Josh Harris has one of the smallest principal ownership stakes of. He might have the smallest principal ownership stake in the entire NFL, and has several people around him. So the issue here that the NFL is trying to tackle is that people just can't afford to buy these teams anymore. And you're right to say like the Major League Baseball has a rule, the National Basketball Association has a rule. None of them will allow corporate ownership of franchises, and that's not what the NFL is talking about here. Um, Now, at one point in time, Major League Baseball did allow this, but they don't anymore. I don't believe. Um, but I think I think the NFL is aware that they're kind of teetering on a line here because if you have one, I think there's a lot of ego involved. These owners like to be, one of the 32 princes of the country or whatever. But the other part is, the more corporate ownership you have, the more it's focused not on football. At least that's a perception. And I think that's the problem is a perception one more than anything.
Yeah, I also think it's to the point. All of that. I mean, obviously, and if a distressed asset like the Washington Commanders got 6 billion, then
It's not
that's
really a distressed asset, is it?
right, and it's also the new floor. So
Yeah.
And Josh Harris, what's it, 30 plus to get to that price? I mean, this is so also the NFL has got to consider which is more of a pain in the tuchus, so to speak, like having to vet and deal with an ownership groups that are 35, 40 people, some kind of, bouquet of portfolio and rich people who now get an entry into the club, or allowing one, private equity firm at 30% ownership stake or something. It's also like, at what point is it keeping this rule in place just adds more headache, homework, and risk with these conglomerate ownership groups, when they could just say, well, what those people normally do is bundle themselves into some kind of equity plan. So why don't we just let that in?
Yeah. Now let's just be clear. I mean, the Washington team was a distressed asset, but it was more distressed on the field and in the eyes of the fans than it was strictly from a financial standpoint. From a financial standpoint, all 32 NFL teams are guaranteed winners because of the media contract and they have a communist style revenue sharing thing that Karl Marx would be proud of. And so that makes even the worst teams like Washington, which was one of the bottom two or three worst teams. Yes, it's distressed, but not in the I don't think really not in a business sense. It wasn't that distressed, just
Well,
to
I
be
mean, you
clear.
could make an argument. Well, I think there was some distressness there
Some,
too.
but not a real true distressed asset like this is in trouble and teetering on the edge. It never was.
No, but no, for sure. Yes, I agree with all of the Marxism stuff. But if brand in the toilet and changing. So not even just in the toilet from the field, but just in like, just a brand disarray and the stadium situation. So you look at something like Seattle, which may, but this sort of may not is coming up here as well with the Allens maybe deciding to keep it, but that's for another day. But let's just stay for the argument that Seattle's the next team. Its brand is fine, fan base huge, stadium great. So there's that's why I was saying that's the new floor, because those
I agree,
elements
yeah.
make that way higher than 6 billion.
I was just kind of disagreeing with the term distress, which would imply that like it's really in trouble.
Right,
And
that's true.
I mean, the fans would say yes, but I don't think it really goes. But so this has been around forever. Chris, you found a story like 30 minutes before we went on the air that we realized was from a year ago, where they were talking about allowing private equity into the NFL. And sorry, excuse me, I'm coughing. But just to be clear, they're talking about minority stakeholders. I just want everybody to understand that the NFL rule has not changed with regard to ownership. Ownership, what somebody who's designated as a principal owner, which is the one that can speak in the holy group of 32, has to be one individual, and it has to be an individual. It's not a corporate group, so you can't bring the CEO of BlackRock in here and have them. That's not what they're talking about. But I think that probably is the direction they're going. If you fast forward 10 years from now or something, if they let private equity in now, the value of the franchises continue to go up. At some point, you're going to have to allow, corporate ownership of NFL teams. Otherwise, nobody but Bill Gates and company can afford them.
Yeah, and if you're kind of holding the company line, if you're an owner that, and I don't think there are many of these, but that does want to see this rule stay in place, that is your argument, right? This is an exclusive club. Those gatekeeping reasons are there for a reason. There's other ways to potentially get some of these ownership groups there. Maybe these level off. Maybe there is a little bit more of a conservative take in terms of an outlook, in terms of, I don't mean politically, I just mean like, we're not going to see these valuations bloom. Maybe that, Washington was an outlier, so that would be the counter argument in that. And if if your ultimate goal is to, protect that exclusivity of that club, any crack like on any front to allow a different definition of what an ownership group can be is mission creep, is letting those elements in where it's not that hard to reason out 5, 10, 15 years where you do have some national corporation owning a team or whatever. We see it in other sports. That's certainly, things that drive things like international soccer and whatnot. So, the slippery slope argument, I'm sure someone within that ownership group is at least considering.
Well, there might just be a reality. Who can afford, so the floor is now 6 billion for Washington, because I agree that was the floor, right? And so let's, hypothetically, and this is not even a rumor or totally untrue, but let's assume the Patriots or the Giants,
right? A marquee team.
Yeah. All of a sudden up for sale. What's that going to go for? 8 billion, more. And so then either you have a huge ownership group, and by the way, these ownership groups are larger than it might appear. Okay, because in the case of Washington, Josh Harris, what's his name, George Rales, Magic Johnson, and who's the other guy? It doesn't matter. Point is, there's a lot of people behind guys like that normally, because it's not George Rales does not just own 10% or whatever in his own name. It's in an LLC. And he's got other members who are investing in his LLC. And there's a lot of hidden investors in all of these things. And so the true ownership group is probably a lot bigger, would be my guess. And that's the only way you could do it. But I think I don't know how many billionaires you've ever been around, but I've been around a couple of these types. And there's a ton of ego involved. I mean, for these type of guys, they could retire and move to Tahiti and never be heard from again, and lay on a beach with a bunch of Tahitian women or men or whatever their preference is laying around them at all times. But they don't want to, and there's never enough for these guys. It's always the next deal and the next thing. And I think the NFL is like just magnified that times 100. And so I think part of it is just the ego of we want it to continue to be this exclusive boys club thing.
Mitch Rails, I believe, right? Isn't
Yeah,
it
there you
Mitch Rails?
go. What did I say?
Um,
George? Yeah, Mitch.
George Rails, they're the Rails brothers' less successful cousin.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, totally. And I think that ultimately they will let this in. I just think that
They have to.
the cash grab is too enticing, and that just drives, and then it fuels the beast. So, they'll probably, it'll be probably as strict and locked down as any, it'll be more incremental than it will be just suddenly Katie bar the door, so to speak, let it all in. But I think you're right. I mean, like the hidden investor thing, that's where I was saying it's almost at some point, if you're going to see ownership groups that are 35 on a deal sheet and then with 15 of them being CEOs of some other kind of investment group, at some point,
What's the
just
difference?
what's the difference? In
Yeah.
fact, dealing with one equity firm is a lot easier.
It might be easier. Yeah, it's just dealing with one guy who's the CEO, or the CFO or whatever, you're representative instead of a whole bunch of different people. Yeah, I mean, of course, that's why the NFL has a rule about the principal owner is for that exact reason. So the NFL's counter to that would say, well, we already only deal with one person. It's Josh Harris's job to deal with George/Mitch Rails and Irvin/Magic Johnson. The NFL doesn't want any part of it. So that's already the case. That would be the argument. That's what I'm saying. I don't disagree with you, but I'm saying that's what the NFL's argument would be. And the other thing I think is the NFL, I think, would say there's a defending the shield position here because if you have one person, I think from an appearance standpoint, it just looks more like the game matters more. If you have one guy who says, we want to win versus some massive private equity, especially private equity, firm who isn't going to make any bones about winning. Probably it's going to be all about the money. And I think that may damage the brand in the eyes of the typical normal 9 to 5 public who watches the NFL.
And you're right about baseball and I don't know all the machinations, but at one point the Chicago Tribune, I believe, owned the Cubs.
Something
and
like
Wrigley.
Sony or somebody had the Dodgers a while ago.
And yeah. So we've seen it, and it did hurt the brand. It hurt the brand of those teams. It didn't go well. So baseball has cautionary tales about those kind of like protect the shield issues. Now I know they operate differently, but still, the corporate ownership of baseball teams was a black eye.
Well, yeah, and that's what the NFL has always been very, very sensitive to that. But here's the counter to that, and I think you probably ought to know where we're going from this. A decade ago, the NFL was vehemently against gambling. They didn't want to touch gambling with a 10-foot pole to the point where, like, you couldn't even sniff Las Vegas. And now they're all in bed with gambling. Not FanSpeak.
FanDuel.
Thank you, FanDuel. FanSpeak is the draft site of our buddy Steve Shoup. FanDuel is an NFL sponsor, and there's a team in Vegas, and they had the Super Bowl there, all of that. So things change. Once money gets involved, things change. And so if you have a couple private equity firms all of a sudden bidding for a team and the price goes way up, you may notice how the ownership group, forgets about things like competitiveness.
I was not surprised, but I wouldn't have been shocked. In fact, I thought it was possible that they'd even rush fix their ability to accept private equity when they were trying to get an ownership group to the 6 billion number for Washington. Like, I almost wondered if it would be like they changed the rules in process to let like Josh Harris get there easier or something like that. So I think it'll definitely be in place by the next sale.
Yeah. And by the way, I was right. It wasn't Sony. It was Fox Entertainment that owned the Dodgers very briefly. 1998 through 2004. So that was what I was thinking of was Fox. But I don't remember the history of when the Major League Baseball changed their rules, but they have, and it's not like that anymore. And now here's the other part. The story, or at least the Pro Football Talk story speculated about whether private equity would be able to own bits and pieces of multiple franchises. And certainly I think the NFL would say they don't want that. But again, as we were just talking about, fast forward a little bit, and if it injects more money in, they may say no now, but if you inject more money into it, and pretty soon you may have a totally different story.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that will be the example of the rules that will be in place. But yeah, once one norm crumbles, the others fall, which is a good transition. Of crumbling norms to old Nick Saban doing his good old days tour this past week, speaking to Congress, going on. We had watched a Fox News piece, but he was anywhere that put a microphone in front of him to talk about the state of college sports, college football, particularly in his case. He sort of claimed that part of his retirement was then to become an advocate or, to lobby or all of those verbs towards fixing the sport he loves. But yeah, so and he had said things. This was not like the first time we had heard similar thoughts from Nick Saban, but yeah. So Nick Saban doesn't love the way college football is going.
Nick Saban, business expert.
Yeah, lots of thoughts here, but I'll let you start it off, Steve.
Okay.
So how'd you react to Nick Saban front and center this past week?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the story in Fox, if you want to look at that, it's on Fox News. Nick Saban urges Congress to make NIL equal across the board, expresses concerns on Dartmouth unionization, which we'll mention. This is by Ryan Morick. It's the 15th of March. I think from a basic, really, really basic, like third grade level, Nick has a point, and I don't disagree with him. The problem is that he's using big words and he doesn't really know what the big words mean. That's the problem. He's talking about what he was talking about is how there needs to be rules governing the collectives, which that okay, from a basic standpoint, I can agree on. And what he's talking about is that when the NIL rules were passed and the NCAA then caved and said everybody can do this, all these universities, as we talked before, have what's called a collective, and it's basically a group of boosters and local business people who are putting money into this, essentially a corporate type entity, which is then passing money out to the players and calling it employment. In some cases it probably is, and some cases it probably isn't. And so what Saban is saying here is that the collective system has turned college football into essentially pro football, because it's all a matter of how much money can you raise in the collective to make you buy the best players. So what Saban is talking about is implementing a revenue sharing model. And this is, of course, where the logic stops. I don't know what kind of revenue sharing model are you talking about? Who's going to share the revenue? The collective is supposed to go toward the players. And so what revenue are we even talking about? You're already sharing, the media revenue that comes in. So I don't know if Nick really has a solution. Nick's identified a problem, but I think the solution is a bit above his head. And I mean, the answer to me is the NCAA. You don't need congressional, rarely does the federal government fix anything. Okay, the federal government usually screws things up. What you need is the NCAA to pass some rules that govern this and maybe disallow collectives, for example, completely. But I don't think Saban has a point, but I think it's kind of above and beyond his head a little bit, the solution.
Yeah, I think, Nick, is saying the obvious things out loud.
But he's not really getting into the details.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like,
and he would tell you he doesn't know what the
it's
answer
obvious,
is.
Yeah. And he also tries to walk a tightrope, right? Because it's like, dude, just if you want to take a stance, be bold enough to say we've destroyed college sports. Like, he's trying to walk a line, right? Which is where he gets himself into that Rubik's Cube, Steve, that you're talking about. Like, well, if we shared it and then we put it into this pod and then was distributed, like, what, dude? You're just drawing things on a whiteboard. You're not really solving anything. Because he won't just come out and say that it's wrong that we're doing this, which would at least be bold take. He's trying to have it a couple different ways. A few things. I'm pretty cynical about Nick Saban on this one for a number of reasons.
Well, he
One,
benefited from it to
right.
start with. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So that's the obvious one, right? Like, so when Nick Saban made all the money, the system worked just fine. So let's, okay. Thanks. Thank you, Nick. But then also, we also know, but then his, this is why I retired and I couldn't succeed, all that stuff, which is all part of his song and dance. It's like, Saban, we already know your success when the players actually are paid, right? You were a spectacular failure at pro football for a lot of these similar reasons. So once there's some kind of, once you aren't the dictator, right? Once you're not running which is what he was, right? In those systems that he was, recruiting, control, university presidents in his pocket, making all the money, right? Like he, really was a dictatorship on all fronts. Once he got to, something like pro football where, you have to be 52 men that make millions
Not a
of dollars.
dictatorship anymore.
No. So, and he was not successful. So I think so. Okay. So now we see, he was able to smart enough to know that that's where it was heading. And that's when he got out. So I also find it very difficult to separate, this whole, like, I couldn't have succeeded. They're going to be college coaches that succeed in this system, right? Like there's always people that succeed in any system. So, I also think, like, Nick, you weren't going to be good at this. So, like, stop crying. And we also know that Nick probably benefited and did the wink, wink, nod, nod to the illegal version of this.
Well, how do you think that the Alabama consistently got the best players? Yeah. Really, what he's actually saying here is that under the old, more corrupt system, which was under the table payments, yeah, and he could have plausible deniability and go, "Oh, I didn't, I don't know anything," but he knows to some level what is going on. Okay, and now that it's out in the open, and a lot of teams can raise more money than could Alabama, or so the thought, or at the very least, it's more on a even keel in terms of the big teams, that all of a sudden he doesn't like it. He wants to really, what he's saying, he wants to go back to the old system where you're giving $100 handshakes,
Yeah. And, which, again, this is one of those things. It's like, he's right, but okay, he's right. Like, we all need air to breathe. It's a really difficult situation where you've basically created these hive mind general managers, that are, disconnected from the coach. He's not wrong about that, right? That, and in the old system where it was wink, wink, nod, nod, all that stuff, you did have more say. The boosters needed to work with you. Now they're just these collectives out there. Like, you think the armchair GMing is bad around draft time for your favorite NFL team. Well, imagine a group of 30 people that think they know how to stock talent on a college football team better than the coach. That's what he's really talking about, right? And so, that's a problem. Yeah, this is college sports is destroyed, like it makes no sense. Like most of those kind of big, broad statements, he's exactly correct at, but he's blaming the exact wrong people. And if he really wanted to come out, I'd love to, if he actually came out and said, we were sold down the river by the powers that be and the paper tiger that runs college sports. And here we are in a mess with no direct way through it, and actually acknowledge the complexities and acknowledge that he actually has no solution. And his only real job is to call attention to a problem.
Yeah. So we come back to this. You and I said this many, many times on this show. The NCAA caused this to happen. It was not the NCAA's fault that they lost a lawsuit in California, and California passed a law that said amateur athletes can sell their name, image, and likeness. That's not their fault. What is their fault is them opening up the transfer portal for no apparent reason whatsoever, and then not placing some sort of reasonable limits on NIL. How about this? How about, the NCAA passes a rule that says somebody who is designated as a booster cannot issue a name, image, and likeness contract to an athlete at the university. How about that? That would cut out, and let them sue you again. Okay, sue us over it. How about that? And that automatically would allow the Bryce Youngs of the world to go make, Nike, commercials or whatever, but it would keep the dirt out of it, and then just let people challenge it, and then go to court and say, yeah, we want, we're advocating for corruption, Your Honor, and see how that goes. So the NCAA rolled over and died like the dogs that they are and they are the reason why we are where we are now.
And also, Saban, we'll see. We'll see, because I mean, a lot of this is going to play out. But this idea that this is driving fans away, that dog don't hunt right
Well,
now.
it drove me away, but I
It
think
did,
I'm in
but
the minority.
the numbers for college
I'm
football
in the
were
minority, is what
their
I'm saying.
highest
Yeah.
ever.
Yes.
We're going to see, probably be interesting to watch over the next 5-6 weeks. We're going to see some of the best numbers for women's college basketball with their tournament. You've got volleyball games selling 80,000. You've got I was looking at these wrestling meets for like big colleges, like state university type things they're selling out. You could make an argument.
You said that before. You said on the last show, wrestling has really got big audience.
That's what I'm saying. You could make, if that, I'd love to see a study that went and started to look at the high tide lifts all boats things here, which I actually think you'd see a trend, an upward tick of interest, profitability, revenue, whatever, on a longer tail of college sports since this kicked in. Whether that's good or bad or not, I'm not here to decide. I'm just saying that if Nick Saban's argument and others are that you're downgrading the product of college athletics, I'm not sure that's going to be true.
Well, I think it's true. But again, I think my view is in the minority. My view of what I enjoyed about college sports in the beginning was it was truly, at least it gave the appearance of being amateur athletes, and now it just looks like dirty pro sports, and I don't appreciate it as much. One thing I would like to touch on here that was mentioned in the Saban piece, the Fox piece on Saban, was the Dartmouth Union issue. So, what this is the Dartmouth basketball team, I believe it was, has legally formed a union that has been accepted by some parent union. And one, I think that's amazing that they have a union of people who are not employees. There's a lawsuit about them being employees. The university denies it. They're not, they don't make a salary, but Saban correctly points out that if there are unions and they're employees, then all these benefits they're getting, which is room and board and all these things, food, could possibly be taxable, taxable income, and so then that would take more federal legislation to get rid of that probably. So I don't know if the Dartmouth team has really completely thought through things, and I don't know what this union is supposed to negotiate if they're not employees legally. So that's a point to me. And this is not the first lawsuit. There's been many lawsuits over the years about employee status of athletes, and there's been a couple unions, but this is the first one I can remember that's actually been formed, but I don't think they've really thought it through very well.
I don't think they care to some degree, right? Like, it's just like it.
You might care if they get a tax notice from the IRS.
Yeah, but I think this is just, like we're gonna fight this fight. I just think here's the overall problem.
What are they negotiating?
I don't think they care. I think they're just forcing the issue.
Mm.
I just think it's a Molotov cocktail. It's not a, like that. I think that's the level that they're going for.
I guess, but see, revenue sharing. So if you have a union, let's play this out. So if these students are employees, meaning professionals that will earn a salary, that salary will have to come from the revenue pot that is the media, mostly 90%, 95% the media rights. If that happens and they have to pay a bigger and bigger piece to the athletes, that means inherently there's less and less money that goes to the athletic program as a whole. And so at some point, this is the problem with balancing the rights of the workers versus the corporation. Because if you could make a legitimate argument that, Chris, you may not agree with me, but I don't know, but you can make a legitimate argument. Like, for example, the United Auto Workers have caused great distress to GM over the years to the point where they've hurt profits and caused people to get laid off and all kinds of stuff. You can have the same problem here with student athletes because the income level isn't going to change. The income level in college athletics is dependent on the media in large part, but then they're just going to have to slice it up more. So that would provide less services to the non-revenue generating sports.
Yeah, those are a bunch of, I don't want to say agree with your union philosophy, but I think those are
Oh,
all
I didn't expect you
legitimate.
to,
Yeah,
but
but I think those are all legitimate questions that'll need to get hashed out. I just don't think that
that's my
they
point.
ultimately care. In fact, like losing this case spectacularly is as valuable to the
Then
Dartmouth team than
they
yeah.
become the
So
martyrs, basically.
yeah, or just yeah. But the problem is that the NCAA or whatever entity wants to, make deal with these college sports issues are that these are just fingers in the dike as the dam bursts, right? Like every week is another one of these
Oh, it
threats. It's
definitely is
another
that.
lawsuit. It's another state house. It's another like rule change that they can't handle. It's another they can't. It's just rushing on, and so to me, this is just like another sizable drop in the bucket.
It's kind of Hoover
Dartmouth
Dam
stuff.
is about to
Yeah,
crack, and somebody's up there taping, putting glue up on the wall or something to try and stop it. I mean, that's what you're talking about. And yes. Um, but again, I come back to the point of it being that the NCAA themselves caused the dam to crack. They didn't have to do what they did. What, 3 years ago? They did not have to open the transfer portal, which by its very nature created free agency for college athletics. You didn't have to do that. That causes problem. You don't have to allow collectives in a manner that you are. And that is what Saban's point is. Even though he just doesn't really articulate it very well, that's what his point is. Um, and that they have only themselves to blame, and somebody's going to have to be bold and stop it. Now, that's the opposite of what the NCAA leadership is, of course, and they won't. So, what if you want to predict it? Tell you what, let's do this. What would you predict 5 years from now, say 10 years from now, college athletics look like with regard to this financing piece? It's a tough one.
yeah. I think they will. It may be sport by sport or university by university. I don't know what level, but I think there will be some level of distinction, demarcation line between where if you tick into some kind of quasi professional and then a governmental body that regulates that, and what is, maybe we call them even celebrated intramural sports, right? Like, so like the lesser, so the D3s of the world or whatever doesn't falls below that demarcation line will essentially run. And because actually intercollegiate intramural sports is actually a pretty robust ecosystem already.
It is, yes.
And so I think you'll see stuff that remains the kind of college athlete kind of stereotype slide be combined there. And then if something, again, I don't know if it's by university, by size, by sport size within the sport, because maybe it's volleyball one place, it's college football somewhere else, whatever, maybe it's a golf team somewhere. But if it ticks into some level of competitiveness or size, then it gets regulated as a quasi professional sport, and you've figured out some kind of contractual relationship between the university, the player, and that governing body.
Yeah, so you're saying like the men's tiddlywink team at Southeastern Iowa State becomes essentially an intramural team, basically. Yeah. Whereas then the University of Iowa football team, which is in the Big Ten, which is a power conference, is in a whole nother level of designation of professional sports, basically. They would be a part of a collective that is a professional sports collective, essentially.
Yes. Look at an interesting, many differences. But if you look at what the HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and the Ivy League actually do with how they manage their sports, I could see, where you want to have, like, especially in football with the Ivy League, they want, there's a long, some ways college football itself was born on some of those Ivy League campuses, and, the 1905s of the world type thing. So there's obviously a long tradition there, but they don't really mess with anything else, right? Like they play amongst themselves, they govern themselves, occasionally. If
they didn't even give big scholarships for a while. I don't know if they do now, but they weren't even giving scholarships to athletes.
And HBCUs sort of play within their own, college basketball is slightly different because those teams can like make a tournament, so to speak. But I think you'll see stuff like that. We already see these kind of like subsystems within college.
I'll go farther. If you want my prediction, I am generally on your boat. I think what we'll eventually see is the power conferences. And I didn't hesitate to say Power 5 because I don't know what the heck the Pac-10 is or Pac-12 or whatever. That could, God God knows what. But Big Ten, SEC, what am I missing? ACC, Big 12, those four. I think you're going to see them form their own system.
Yeah, I think, and I think these two ideas could actually be part of the same thing. And so I agree. Yeah.
We're saying it's kind of differently the same thing. So that's the only way. And then, they'll just kind of stop pretending. And meanwhile, the D3s of the world, again, the Southeast Louisiana states, that play, Southeastern Mississippi State, they'll continue to do what they do. And if somebody there has, a sponsorship deal with the local Chevy dealer, God bless them.
Yeah, right. They'll have, the rules will be relevant to,
right.
I think you'll just, which is fair, right? Like to some degree, the one empathetic thing I'll say about the NCAA is that, at some point, this is just too huge a center to hold. It's too divergent. It's too huge. Just even the nature of the United States is massive. So you have just varying degrees of relevance.
They didn't have to do what they did, though.
No. Yes, I have very little sympathy for them, but you could imagine that this end game was going to always happen to some degree, even if they didn't accelerate it with their own stupidity.
We called it years ago in the early days of the show. We've been saying this for years.
Yeah, it's too big.
Yeah, it's too big. That's exactly right. It's too big. So is Saban right? Saban's right in saying college football has kind of been destroyed in a sense. He's right about that. In a very, very basic way of, hey, the NCAA needs more, rules regarding revenue sharing. He's right. But he's kind of right in the same sense that water is wet a little bit. He's not really providing any solutions. And he said that to his credit. He said, I don't have a solution. So it's almost kind of like the only reason this is a story is because it's Nick Saban stating the obvious. Otherwise, it's just somebody stating the obvious, which isn't that useful.
Yeah, and he was on Capitol Hill, so that
right.
The double whammy. Yeah. So a different level of notable is you may have seen that I think it's coming up at the spring or sometime not too far off. Just by turning on your Netflix channel, you will get to see maybe the fight of the century. I don't know, but
I doubt that.
Mike Tyson and what's a stupid YouTube kid called?
Jake Paul,
right, are going to be fighting which is a celebrity match, I guess at this point is the best way to name that, live on Netflix, which has all the train wreck qualities that you would want, and I will probably be watching. But
I might watch it too if it's on Netflix and I don't have to pay $100 to watch it. I'll probably watch it. Yeah,
but that's the interesting part here, live on Netflix.
Yeah, first of all, the fight is hilarious. Number one, a YouTuber, not a real boxer. I don't care what you say. He's not a real boxer. He's fought some people. And what's the brother's name? John? No, there's a brother. I can't remember the brother's name. The brother has boxed too, but he's not a real, but Jake Paul teeters on the edge of real boxing. Mike Tyson is 57, I believe.
Logan Paul. That's the other one.
There you go. Logan Paul. But Mike Tyson is still Mike Tyson. And if you look at him, there's been some video of him training that I saw. He looks like Mike Tyson. I don't think he's gonna drop this kid rapidly, is what I think. But yeah, so the interesting part and reason why, so I think there's a train wreck quality. Everybody wants to see what the train wreck is, because it's either going to be a joke and Tyson drops this kid, or the great Mike Tyson, who's one of the most feared boxers in history, gets dropped by some random arrogant punk YouTuber. One of those two things is going to happen. But the interesting part is Netflix. So we've talked on the show before about Netflix transitioning into live sports. Why are they doing it? Well, because in the early days of Netflix, they had no competition. They started out distributing, DVDs via the mail, and they transitioned to becoming the only streaming, essentially the only streaming source of streaming movies. And now that everybody and their brother has one, all of a sudden their market share is a lot less than it was. So what's next for them? Live broadcasts. So they've started in sports. We've seen other things. We've seen them talk about what was it baseball?
They've sort of been buzzing around the edges of any sports media.
Yeah, there's been two, right. I thought there was one in particular, but they've been
NBA. I think they're kind of
maybe it was NBA, but Oh, you know what it was? It was they were getting involved in they were a part of that the uh the local sports bundling package we were talking about, if I recall. Was it not that?
The,
Anyway, point I can't remember. I'm getting it wrong, but point is they've been buzzing around this, to use your term, for a while. Um and now this is kind of what the second step into live. And so could you see them doing more of this? Absolutely.
oh, it's
Uh,
pro wrestling, right? They were going to start doing
That's what
live.
it
Yeah,
was. That's what
which
it was.
which is the leave the sports or the sports entertainment part out of it. Just what was the last live thing you watched on Netflix?
What
Never.
about like a live concert?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they might have done some. They might have done something concert
Well,
related
could you see
recently.
like,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, the Rolling Stones do a
Yeah,
broadcast, or Taylor Swift do a stadium,
you'll see
pick
it.
your artist, Drake or whatever. I mean, that's going to happen.
The
There
Netflix
have been
is
some comedy stuff, I believe, that they're doing.
yeah, but not long. I don't know if they've ever. I don't know
Has
if
it
you've.
not been live?
No, I don't think so. So that is really the interesting part. Netflix has, to a large degree, already won the streaming wars. We're hearing that there's going to be mergers with some of the other big ones, and they're all licensing their stuff back to Netflix because that's
But they went
seven,
through
eight.
this. Yes, some of it is, but they went through a really competitive period where they weren't getting all of
No,
that.
no, no. This is in the last 3 to 4 months, really.
Yeah, right.
That was what those other companies did. They pulled all their stuff. They licensed the crap out of it in the early when Netflix first moved to streaming, and no one had either the idea to or had ready their own streaming services. So they licensed their content away to Netflix. That helped grow Netflix. Then they started pulling it all off when they all had their own thing. Now that those things are not really competing with Netflix, they ran back to, well, let's just leverage this library and we'll just license it back. You could watch The Sopranos on Netflix in like the early 2000s type time. Then you couldn't for 10 years. Now you can. So all kinds of licensing deals, which means all the people know that is the best place to have their content. And then what's the thing that Netflix hasn't conquered is anything live.
And enter Mike Tyson and
And
Jake
Jake
Paul in the
Paul.
most ridiculous fight in decades.
um yeah, totally. And I think my thing still stands the same to me that there's really very little difference between this and a pro wrestling match to a large degree, especially in terms of the low risk live nature. Netflix isn't going to trot out election coverage as their first live stream. There's lots of things that would
No,
be.
but if it works,
It will come,
then
yeah, but it's not going to
yeah,
be first.
no,
Let's put up Tyson, Jake Paul. Everyone
yeah,
can laugh and we'll test the pipes.
yeah, and if it goes horribly wrong,
No one cares.
no harm, no foul,
Yeah.
basically, because it's one little boxing match.
But if it works and they get all of their infrastructure set, then everything.
And I don't even know if this is a true sanctioned boxing match either. This is just kind of appears to be kind of a circus sideshow a little bit.
I think there may even be some like emergent celebrity match governing body. It's not too dissimilar to the and this does exist, the governing body that governs competitive eating.
Yeah, this is not the WBA or WBC sanctioning the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight. I don't think the WB, even as corrupt as they are, they do have some standards, and I don't know if they would even license Tyson anymore because of his age and everything. Who knows?
No, yeah, no one. They don't want to be responsible for someone dying in the ring.
Yeah, exactly.
So last thing here is who was it? Who put out this list? Someone semi-respectable, but a list of the top 10 earning athletes. And that's always kind of interesting, but there's some names on here that even old man Steve and I are before our time.
Yeah, this is on Bleacher Report, but it's really Sportico did this. The Bleacher Report columnist Michael Jordan's Tiger Woods, top Sportico's 2024 list of highest paid athletes ever by Scott Polachek, I guess. And Sportico is kind of hard to access, without paying money. But so I think I'm not even going to make you guess because one, you saw the list, but everybody knows Michael Jordan is at the top of this list. There's no doubt. So, and it doesn't say how they earn these things, and it's inflation adjusted. Okay. So, this just says it's the top 10 highest paid athletes ever. It does not distinguish payment from the sport versus payment from advertising. Does not distinguish that, and it's inflation adjusted. Michael Jordan, 3.75 billion. Would you care to guess? Do you know the list?
I looked at the list. Yeah.
Okay, so number 2 is Tiger Woods, 2.6 billion. Number 3, Cristiano Ronaldo, 1.92 billion. Number 4, Arnold Palmer, 1.76 billion. Let me run through it, then we can laugh about it. LeBron James, 1.7 million. Jack Nicklaus, 1.67 billion. Lionel Messi, 1.67 billion. David Beckham, 1.9 billion. Roger Federer, 1.49 billion. And the aforementioned Floyd Mayweather, 1.48 billion. What in the hell is Arnold Palmer doing on this list?
Yeah, some people out there probably going, "Why is there a drink beverage on the list?" I mean, now I was old enough to remember Arnold Palmer as a pitchman, right? Like, post retirement, and he did a million things, so I knew who Arnold Palmer was. But sitting here at 52 years old, I was still too old to watch him, do his sport. Now, I guess that would be a fascinating case study. He must have just done those ads, and then, did he get stake in some of those companies? Like, he must have really done some smart investing.
Oh, yeah. And he did, and you're right. Now, yeah, it's way too old for us to have seen him play golf. I mean, according to his bio on Wikipedia, which is always right, his final WPGA championship was in 1971, which is it's before our time. But yeah, he had a bunch of pitches and stuff. And also remember that this is inflation adjusted. So they're not saying, for those who don't understand what that means, what they're saying is they're taking the value of the money he earned at the time and then adjusting it into today's dollars. That's what they're saying here. And so it's not a cash in pocket kind of situation. Frankly, I'm kind of shocked that Michael Jordan's inflation adjusted number isn't way more than 3.75 billion, to be honest.
It's amazing when we're surprised he was just shy of 4 billion.
Well, yeah, he owned the Charlotte Hornets,
Yeah.
and he was Mr. Nike. I mean, Nike has him to thank for them. They were teetering on the edge of, nothingness for a while before him. As you saw in that, what was the Lakers show on HBO a while ago? Magic
Oh,
Time.
Winning Time.
There you go. They talked about that kind of a little bit, how Magic Johnson picked the wrong company. That was a storyline in one of the episodes.
Yeah, and they also, I think it's Netflix, they did that movie Air, that's all about.
Yeah, I haven't
seen it either, but that's all about basically that same time in Nike.
So Arnold Palmer, yeah, very surprising. But on the other hand, if you adjust for inflation, it may be a bit more reasonable. I'm not a soccer fan. I don't think you are either. Cristiano, if he walked into my kitchen, I wouldn't know who he was. But in terms of what he looks like, but that doesn't surprise me. Jack Nicklaus surprises me even more than Arnold Palmer.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, he was a mega star. I mean, he was like, he was the antecedent to Tiger Woods in many ways. But still, and he was a pitchman. I do remember that. But Arnold Palmer was way more, even being older, was way more in the kind of public consciousness for longer.
Yes. Yeah, he had a distinct difference with Tiger Woods, which is that a woman did not chase him down the street with a golf club, as far as we know. But yeah, I mean, Tiger Woods he was Mr. Nike and Mr. Gatorade and a whole bunch of other things. I don't remember Jack in too many, he was in kind of hair club for men type commercials, as best I can recall. Maybe not literally that, but I remember him in ads. I don't remember him being a major pitchman for a major company. It was always kind of one-off things. And so that really surprises me.
Yeah, it's, one thing, the dominant thing in the list is it's either all individuals, athletes, or with the case of basketball and soccer, you have very little equipment, right? Like your fate, like you get, well, especially in basketball, smaller rosters. Soccer has bigger rosters, but there's no impediment, right? Even baseball has more, stuff that players wear and whatnot. So, this is also, which we know, these lists are always dominated by athletes in individual sports because they can hog all of the attention and get, everything goes to you. And then basketball and soccer where, your face is still, you're wearing a shirt and you have a face, and it's much easier to sell those things and to get the kind of mass consciousness that you need to get those endorsement deals.
Football's one of 22 people on a field and they wear helmets.
Yeah.
It's hard to relate to that. Now, what I don't know, I mean, Chris and I are both in the United States, and neither one of us are soccer fans. I don't know if whether these soccer guys, there's three of them on here: Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, David Beckham. I don't know if those guys are in like major ad campaigns in Europe that we don't know about.
They are.
Okay, so then presumably then a significant portion of this income is ads. It's just in Europe where nobody sees it because they wouldn't sell anything notable in the United States, but in Europe apparently that's not.
I think there's a growing market for them in the United States, but yes, that's the emerging market in those markets, not the market. So,
yeah, right. I mean, they're not going to make Ronaldo the pitch man of
no,
But
the thing is, I mean,
the
thing about soccer is now, I mean, it depends how you slice and dice it, but because the United States is huge, 50 states, yada yada. But, those soccer players, they can hop around really Central, South America, Europe, Asia still. And you can get, like you have all those countries available to you, to sell your wares, so to speak. And the international nature of soccer means that, the games transcend countries. So it's just, so if you get the big contracts in Europe and maybe Brazil and things like that, and then you string together another long tail of 7, 8, 9 different endorsement contracts within, mid-tier countries, those are a lot of revenue streams.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, I agree. It's just, I think you categorized the United States correctly, which is an emerging market.
Yeah. Right. Nice to have. And probably, will help to drive some of those mega stars up that list over time. But yeah, they're making their wares.
I don't think your average person in the United States could identify Lionel Messi. I certainly couldn't. And I think most people probably could not, but in Europe they could. I mean, that's
100%.
What we need.
Yeah. I mean, they're getting there. I mean, I think, you get like a 4 out of 10 now, but the arrow up in America. It also depends on where you are.
I think an arrow
and who you are.
A little up. I don't think it's hugely up, but that's a story for another day. We're out of time now, unfortunately, but we'll see. Part of me is just bored by soccer. I'm prejudiced by the fact that I strongly dislike watching soccer.
Yes, you are. All right, so Steve, are you guys doing daily episodes now with the swivel chair that is Commanders News?
No, we weren't doing daily episodes, but we were doing hourly updates on the free agency track for the C words, progress in free agency. So that is up there. We quit updating it as of like Thursday, but the free agency tracker is up there, as is the latest Hogside podcast and all of our other regular written content.
All right. And we here on It's Just Business. We'll see you in 2 weeks.